I've always been fascinated by hospitals, not just because of my job as a nurse, but because of the eerie stories that often surround them. Working night shifts at an old hospital, I've heard more than my fair share of chilling tales from colleagues. This is one of those stories, shared among the nurses, that turned out to be more real than I'd ever imagined. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind howls like a banshee and the rain pelts against the windows. I was working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift in the old wing of the hospital. The building was an ancient structure, filled with creaky floors and drafty corridors. Most people thought it was just a rundown relic, but those of us who worked there knew there was something unsettling about it. That night, I was stationed on the 4th floor, which housed the critical care unit. The patients here were usually in stable condition, but the atmosphere in the ward was always heavy, almost suffocating. It was as if the walls themselves were steeped in the tension and fear of countless past patients. Around 2 a.m., I was alone in the nurses' station, trying to catch up on paperwork. The storm outside raged on, and the power flickered intermittently. The lights cast long, uneven shadows on the walls, adding to the eerie ambiance. I heard the faint beeping of the heart monitors and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Everything was as it should be, until I heard a soft, echoing cry coming from one of the patient rooms. I froze, my pen hovering over the paperwork. The sound was unmistakable, a child's cry, delicate and forlorn. The ward was quiet, and it was unusual to hear such a sound, especially since there were no pediatric patients on this floor. I took a deep breath and decided to investigate. I walked down the hallway, the sound growing slightly louder with each step. I approached room 412, the source of the noise. The door was slightly ajar, and the light inside flickered. I pushed it open, and to my surprise, the room was empty. The bed was made neatly, and there was no sign of anyone having been there recently. I double-checked the charts. There were no patients scheduled to be in this room. The cry had stopped, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. I chalked it up to stress and fatigue, but the incident stayed with me. I returned to the nurses' station, my heart racing, and tried to focus on my work. A few minutes later, my colleague Lisa, who had been on a break, joined me. Lisa had been working at the hospital for years and was known for her calm demeanor. I decided to share my experience with her. "Hey Lisa, did you hear that? I thought I heard a child crying from room 412. Lisa looked at me with a knowing smile. "You're not the first to hear that. We've had strange things happen on this floor for years." Her words made my skin crawl. She went on to tell me about a story she had heard from the older nurses. Decades ago, room 412 had been a pediatric ward. A young girl had been a patient there, suffering from a severe illness. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, she passed away. Ever since, there had been reports of her crying echoing through the halls, especially during stormy nights. I tried to shake off the chills, attributing Lisa's story to hospital lore. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I felt a sudden drop in temperature, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Around 4 a.m., I was checking on a patient in room 405 when I noticed something strange. The lights in the hallway began to flicker more intensely, and the beeping of the heart monitors seemed to sync with an irregular rhythm. I couldn't explain it, but it felt as if the entire ward was holding its breath. Then I heard it, the faint sound of children's laughter, echoing through the hall. It was distant, almost playful, but in the context of the hospital, it was deeply unsettling. I checked the monitors and tried to calm myself, but the laughter continued, growing louder and more intrusive. I decided to investigate again, this time checking every room on the floor. Room 412 was still empty, but as I walked past it, the door creaked open wider, as if inviting me in. I hesitated, then pushed the door fully open. The room was cold, and I felt a sudden rush of unease. Just then, I heard a soft, raspy voice whispering my name. It was so faint that I thought I might be imagining it. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. The room seemed to close in around me, and I had to force myself to leave. Lisa's earlier story about the child's ghost flashed in my mind, and I started to feel a growing sense of dread. I returned to the nurses' station, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. As I worked, I couldn't help but glance nervously at the clock, willing the hours to pass faster. Just before my shift ended, I received a call from the emergency room. They needed a few extra hands to help with an influx of patients. I hurried downstairs, eager to escape the eerie atmosphere of the fourth floor. As I left the old wing, I glanced back up the hallway. The lights flickered once more, and I swear I saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor. I blinked, and it was gone. The rest of the shift was busy, but uneventful. As the sun began to rise and the storm outside finally subsided, I felt a wave of relief. The haunted feeling of the night seemed to lift with the first light of dawn. In the following days, I heard more stories from my colleagues about strange occurrences in the hospital. It seemed that every nurse had a tale of unexplained phenomena. Some spoke of ghostly apparitions, others of unsettling noises, but they all shared a common thread, a feeling of being watched, of something unexplainable lurking just out of sight. I never encountered anything as vivid as that stormy night, but the stories left a mark on me. The hospital, despite its sterile and clinical appearance, had an undercurrent of mystery that couldn't be easily dismissed. I learned to accept the unexplained and to approach my work with a healthy dose of skepticism and respect for the unknown. I still work those late shifts, and though I sometimes hear whispers of ghost stories from my colleagues, I try to keep an open mind. After all, the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the most chilling experiences are the ones that leave us questioning the boundaries between reality and the supernatural.